Salam and greetings of peace. It's an honor to be speaking here in this very distinguished conference. So the title of my presentation is Poetics and Politics of Placemaking, Boundaries of Self and the Other in Golshahr. Golshahr is a refugee quarter in northeast Iran, predominantly inhabited by Afghan refugees from Shia Hazara background. In his book, The Hazaras and the Afghan State, Nematullah Ibrahimi writes, as a result of the systematic destruction and extortion that came with the victory of Amir Abdurrahman Khan's army over the Hazaras, the local economy of Hazarajat collapsed, and the Hazara population was greatly reduced due to genocide. The Hazaras who fled Afghanistan generally went in three main directions: the Indian subcontinent in the south, Iran to the west, and Central Asia to the north. The Hazaras of Khorasan province of Iran are descendants of those that fled the genocide and its subsequent destruction and devastation. This is a testimony of a 34-year-old lady who lives in Golshahr. She defines herself as a muhajir, an immigrant, a word too familiar to Afghan refugees in Iran. I was born in Afghanistan, and 34 years have passed since then. I'm still in Iran, but there is a border between us and the neighbor. We are called muhajir. I found it easier among those like ourselves. She means among people who are from Hazara and from Afghan background. I lived for several years with the Turk and Lur communities in Malayer and Buin Zahra, and although I had a good relationship with them, I was always looking to find a fellow man and fellow woman from my own country. I enjoy listening to the melodious accents of the millennials, and when I am with them, I feel like I'm living in my homeland. In 2006, we were forced to move to Mashhad because of the same word, being muhajir. And this was the best event of my life because I got to know a neighborhood where I feel calm, and every moment of being there is a beautiful memory for me. And this is the neighborhood that I'm going to speak to you about today. Golshahr is a familiar name to Afghans living in Iran. It is a neighborhood in the eastern outskirts of Mashhad city. This area has been the place of residence of Hazara communities who survived the genocide, fled the war, and came to Iran since 4 decades ago. The similarities in language, religion, and culture, as well as closeness to the borders of the two countries, were the reason why the Afghans preferred to live in Iran, and particularly in Golshahr. Golshahr lies on the margins of the Mashhad residential area. It is a major residential area for Afghans to the extent that local Iranians call it Kabul Shahr or Kabul city. The area is inhabited mainly by Shia Hazaras. According to the statistics available in the social information system of Mashhad municipality, about 35 to 40,000 people, which include 99% of the total population of Golshahr, are immigrants from Afghanistan. In Iran, it is illegal for Afghans to own a property. Even after living decades and decades in the country, the structural discrimination against Afghans means they can't own the place they live. They can't even own a SIM card. They can't own cars. Basically, the discrimination on social, political, economic, and cultural level against Afghans in Iran has kept them in a state of instability despite living generations and generations. Despite this fact, in Golshahr, Many have constructed or purchased their own houses. This is accepted at the local level through informal agreements between the buyer and the seller, but it doesn't have any legal validity as it is not documented officially. There are also several state-run schools, preschools, primary schools, and technical training facilities for trading professions, which are run by Afghans and for Afghans. There are English classes, charities for people with disabilities, a cooperative for women, art houses, informal galleries, an increasing number of cafes where young people gather, do art, do theater workshops, and organize book clubs. Despite its uniqueness and significance in the reconstruction of resilient identities and new process of cultural and socio-spatial transformation, Golshahr remains distant and out of place. Engaging with fragmented memories of exile in Golshahr, this essay creates a special and poetic account into the exploration of memory, space, and attachment to place from the perspective of the refugees living in the place. It does so with what Aitken calls ethno-poetry, an emotive mapping of stories that describes connection of people to the other people and to places. I use images, some taken by myself, but mostly by the photographers who are living in Golshahr, and dialogues, stories, and narratives to provide a new framing of the individual and collective experience of the Hazara community in Golshahr. I would reflect on the observation that emerged from my ethnographic field during the August 2013, and interviews, focus group discussions, participatory photography, and the collective creation of images that has been ongoing with younger Afghan refugees in Golshahr for the last 10 years. What is important is to highlight the continuity between social belonging and urban space, which I explore how belonging is reinforced through a special imaginary memory and reappropriation of a space in everyday life of the community in Golshahr. A woman selling fruits in her house. This is one of the most famous landmarks of Golshahr, as the local Hazara community call it Shulugh Bazar or Bazar Shulughe, which means the crowded market. This is a place that the local community visits on a daily basis in a very ritualistic manner. In the evenings, they gather, young people meet each other, couples go on a date, and sometimes old people find new comradeships. It's a very vibrant part of the neighborhood, and what I've heard that Afghans living in other parts of the town also come to visit Shulugh Bazar in evenings. There are lots of local shops, traditional bakeries, restaurants. People go and eat kabeli polo and have mazari bread, and it's a very vibrant space. Lefebvre, Harvey, and Dykich, among few others, have considered informal settlements to be embodiment of the right to the city. They explain that the everyday resistance and action of informal settlements such as Golshahr has led to creation of living quarters that challenge the dominance of the state-dictated model of special regulation and control. Basically, despite the fact that Afghan refugees in Iran are excluded from official citizenship and are excluded from being involved equally in production of urban space, the people of Golshahr have influenced through informal processes of land acquisition and building construction. They have challenged and transformed the current mode of space production, and through negotiation and everyday mobilization, they have secured access to infrastructure, livelihoods, and urban services. The production of a space is highly political. There is a politics of a space because a space is political. Such a space is produced through acts of naming, like the names the community use for appropriating their neighborhood, and the distinctive activities and narratives that are associated with the particular space in Golshahr. And the material space shows that the social construction of a space and the immaterial aspect of creating it is seen through the actual transformation of memories, social exchanges, images, and daily use of the material space by the people in Golshahr. I also discussed the gendered consciousness of space, intergenerational experiences, and the demonstration of space as a translocal and transnational, which is important considering that the majority of Afghan refugees who later moved to Afghanistan, many of them formed the very elite part of the Afghan society, came actually from Golshahr. Number of Afghan ministers, they were raised and educated in Golshahr. A great number of Afghan musicians, writers, sport athletes, they all came from Golshahr. So this is a particular area and very important in terms of the cultural production and how the translocality continues to exist in this very small neighborhood. I never forget the conversation I had with this old man when he told me about having this small corner for the past 40 years of his life. And he just told me with such a pride and dignity that this is my place, and I've had it for the last 40 years of my life. And that was where he continued to support his family by repairing shoes. His testimony reminds me of what Terton says, that displacement is not just about losing the space in the world. It's also about a process of finding a place for yourself. What is interesting in terms of the symbolic imaginaries in Golshahr is how the local community have brought traditional symbols, clothes, flags from Afghanistan to Iran, not only for selling them, but also to continue bringing that culture alive and to keep the continuity and existence of cultural identity in exile. The construction of an urban image or identity from within is also reflected in an active involvement in urban placemaking, something which the community in Golshahr is very proactively engaged in. You would see a lot of children in the public space, how they take the advantage of occupied space in a neighborhood which is deprived from children's playground or fancy places for children to go, but how children use this space on a day-to-day basis also show how these communities are promoting autonomy and agency on both individual and community level. They are not only creating a space for representation, but also a space where they can consider their own. The examples and the stories of Golshahr show that refugees have redefined their refugiehood in a sense that by reclaiming the space, they have redefined what it means to be a local to a place. And this is what I want to discuss about, how they have rewritten their own spatial, temporal, and political topography to the area. A space is both a complex social construction and the condition in which individuals and groups interact provides the structures that enable and constrains that agency. What we see in Golshahr is how the space is part of the generation and the production of new cultural identities. For example, the third generation of Afghan refugees living in Golshahr, how they continue to be shaping their own cultural identity while being very much part of the Iranian culture, listening to Iranian music, young people dressing very similar to Iranian youth, but at the same time very proud of their own cultural inclination and connection. This is one of the testimonies and photographs of a young Afghan photographer in Golshahr, where he says, "These men are the monks of my land. Every afternoon, men with their arrows gather in an area and compare and compete with each other." The photo demonstrates how the men and young children and different actors engage in very different spatial intervention and how they produce different images of the city. Culture and identity transmute space into territory, the historical and contemporary relationalities of urban space, which is very distinct to this neighborhood, informs the practices of urban governance on issues as diverse as planning, housing, and infrastructure provision. And you see the everyday rituals, which is strongly maintained by the women in Golshahr, from baking traditional breads, by inviting travelers and local people during the month of Ramadan, organizing collective feasts during Eid days, and finally by creating this feeling of being at home, the intimate feelings that exist between the community, the safety that people often talk about while they are in Golshahr, and the community cohesion, which unlike other parts of Iran, where Afghans are very disintegrated and very controlled, people in Golshahr often have the strongest feeling of cultural identity. And what I've often been told as well, due to discrimination of Iranian police and immigration office, there are often police checkups at the entrance of the area where the police comes and checks the IDs of residents, and in case they don't have a valid ID, they might be deported. So I've heard a lot of time from the neighborhood inhabitants that they have different telegram channels, like a Golshahr telegram, that they inform each other if there is a police who has come to cut what they call Afghani Begir, means coming to catch Afghans. It's a very racist terminology, but unfortunately that's the very reality of the life of Afghans. So they inform each other through telegram channels, and the people who have ID cards take the kids who don't have ID cards in their homes and provide a secure space and try to hide them. In a way, the community tries to look after their own people. And then there is this connection to the land where the people of Golshahr are very actively planting and active in agriculture. They produce their own fresh green vegetables, which they use for cooking, for example, kuku and ash during the month of Ramadan. And they also sell these greenery. They often rent the land from the local Iranian owner, and then they plant. And the majority of the people who work on the lands are women, Afghan women. They work harder than men, but they're often paid less. And then you see the early mornings in cold winter days, Afghan men in the main square of Golshahr waiting to be taken by construction companies. If they are lucky enough, they'll get a day of job. If not, they'll have to stay and wait for the next day. It's a very touching photograph of the resilience of Afghan men, how they provide for their families in exile while being discriminated and while not having access to official economical. So I would finish my talk with the story of this grandmother. My grandmother was the first from her family to come to Iran her grandchild, the fourth generation of Afghans in Iran, remains still a muhajir. Thank you. Thank you.